The pilot rolled in, put precision munitions straight down the smokestacks of both ships, and flew away clean. 2 ships disabled, 1 sortie. The pilot returned to the carrier while the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda sat immobilized in the Gulf of Oman with their propulsion systems destroyed and their crew watching the smoke rise from the specific component that the pilot had targeted with the kind of precision that transforms the phrase surgical strike from metaphor into operational description. 2 days earlier, a Super Hornet off the USS Abraham Lincoln had taken out the rudder of the MT Hansna with the M61A2 Vulcan 20mm cannon. Not a missile. The gun, the specific aircraft gun that fires at 6,600 rounds per minute with the accuracy that the engagement footage documented. The Hansna's steering gear absorbed those rounds, and the tanker stopped being able to steer. A ship that cannot steer is a ship that goes nowhere. That was the point. Now understand what the targeting precision of these 2 engagements communicates to everyone watching this conflict. Hitting a smokestack with precision munitions from altitude on a moving vessel in the operational conditions of the Gulf of Oman is not a capability that exists in most of the world's air forces. The circular error probability of the GBU-12 Pavway 2 laser-guided bomb, the 500-pound precision weapon that CENTCOM thermal footage appears to show employed against the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda, is under 1 meter. Less than 1 meter of deviation from the designated aim point on a moving ship, at sea, in rough water conditions, hitting the smokestack rather than the hull, disabling the propulsion system rather than the vessel itself, preserving the crew while eliminating the ship's ability to reach its destination. This is American naval aviation operating at the outer boundary of what precision-guided munitions can achieve in an operational environment, and the footage that CENTCOM released is not modesty. It is a demonstration. Specifically designed to communicate to every government, every shipping operator, every maritime intelligence service, every tanker crew considering whether to attempt the blockade run that the MT Hansna and the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda attempted, exactly what American precision means in the specific context of blockade enforcement. The message is not, we will sink your ships. The message is, we can disable whatever tanker we want, at whatever point in its transit we choose to engage it, with whatever level of precision serves the operational objective. We can hit the rudder, we can hit the smokestack. We can hit the propulsion system while leaving the hull intact and the crew safe. We can do this with 1 aircraft on 1 sortie. And we will do it to every vessel that attempts to run the blockade until the Iranian side either accepts the terms of the framework or runs out of tankers willing to attempt the transit. The blockade numbers released by CENTCOM this morning put the full economic weight of this enforcement architecture into its operational context. Over 70 tankers currently held from Iranian ports. The regime losing an estimated $500 million per day. The cargo capacity of the vessels being held representing more than 166 million barrels of Iranian oil, worth an estimated $13 billion at current market prices. $13 billion of Iranian oil that cannot reach buyers. $500 million per day being deducted from the regime's operational budget. 70 tankers that attempted to reach Iranian ports and were turned back or disabled. The tourniquet is applied, and it is tightening. But the specific operational detail about what the tankers were trying to accomplish reveals the depth of the engineering crisis that the blockade has created inside Iran's oil infrastructure. The very large crude carriers that have been attempting to run the blockade were running empty, not loaded with sanctioned Iranian crude, trying to deliver it to buyers. Empty, trying to get to Iran to load and break the economic siege. The reason this distinction matters is what it reveals about the Kharg Island storage situation. The tanks at Kharg Island have been filling since the blockade began preventing export. The production that continues underground generates oil that must go somewhere. The storage tanks receive it, but storage tanks have capacity limits. When those capacity limits are reached, production must either stop or overflow. Stopping production means shutting in wells, which creates the specific engineering problem of pressure loss in reservoirs that have been producing. And pressure loss produces the kind of permanent reservoir damage that makes wells significantly less productive when they are eventually reopened. The regime needs the storage tanks emptied. The tankers running empty toward Iranian ports were trying to provide that storage relief, to take the oil from the tanks to sea to create the space that allows production to continue without shutting in the wells permanently. The FA-18 smokestack engagement ended that plan for 2 more vessels. The tankers that are sitting disabled in the Gulf of Oman cannot load Iranian oil into their holds. The storage tanks that they were supposed to relieve continue to fill. The production that needs to continue to prevent permanent reservoir damage is running against the storage capacity that the blockade is preventing from being relieved. This is the specific engineering mechanism through which the blockade is producing physical damage to Iranian oil infrastructure that will persist beyond the conflict's resolution. Not just the financial damage of lost revenue, the physical damage of pressure loss in reservoirs that are being shut in because the storage system has no outlet. The engineering nightmare that the IRGC's own technical personnel understand better than any outside analysis can describe. Once a reservoir loses pressure through improper shutdown, reopening the well does not restore the production rates that existed before the shutdown. The damage is measurable, permanent, and proportional to how long the wells remain shut in. The regime that is losing $500 million per day is also losing the geological productivity of the oil fields that were supposed to be generating revenue for decades after any political settlement. Araghchi went on Iranian state media and called the American strikes on the ports a reckless military adventure that violated the ceasefire precisely when a diplomatic solution appeared possible. This statement deserves the analytical attention it requires because it reveals the specific cognitive framework through which the Iranian Foreign Ministry is processing the conflict's operational reality. The day before Araghchi's statement, Iran launched 15 ballistic missiles at the UAE. 15 at a Gulf partner that had taken no military action against Iranian forces, at a country whose territory has been absorbing Iranian ordnance throughout the conflict's duration. Those 15 missiles in the Iranian Foreign Ministry's framing do not constitute a ceasefire violation. They constitute the legitimate exercise of Iranian military prerogatives in the context of American aggression. The American retaliatory strikes on the port facilities that coordinated the attacks on American warships constitute, in the same framing, a reckless military adventure that violated the ceasefire. Rubio's translation of this framing is more operationally precise than any diplomatic analysis. Iran tried to run the blockade. Iran fired multiple missiles at Gulf neighbors. Iran got shut down in real time. And now Iran is upset that it worked. The angry statement is the institutional response of an organization that expected its actions to produce accommodation and instead produced consequences. The asymmetry of the framing, Iranian offensive military action, is legitimate. American defensive response is a ceasefire violation, is the specific information operation architecture that Iranian state communications have been deploying throughout the conflict. It serves the domestic audience that the internet shutdown has sealed inside the regime's information environment. It serves the international media outlets whose editorial relationships with Iranian sources create the specific framing that appears in coverage without attribution to the source's institutional interests. And it attempts to create the moral equivalence that would make American military action appear as provocative as the Iranian actions that triggered it. CENTCOM's Admiral Cooper did not engage with the framing at the rhetorical level. He released the video. The thermal footage of the FA-18 rolling in on the Sea Star 3, the smokestack impact, the smoke rising, the Sevda's immediate burst of flame followed by the heavy black smoke pulling from the funnel, the visual record that answers every Iranian claim about the nature of the engagement with documentation that does not require interpretation. The video does the talking. The tanker is disabled. The pilot flew away clean. 70 tankers turned back, 4 disabled. 166 million barrels of blocked oil worth $13 billion, $500 million per day in lost revenue. These are not disputed numbers. These are the operational record of a blockade that is working. The FA-18 Super Hornet is the specific platform that makes this enforcement architecture operationally possible at the scale and precision that the blockade requires, and it deserves the technical examination that reveals why. The Super Hornet is Boeing's twin-engine carrier-based strike fighter, the backbone of American naval aviation, the aircraft that is simultaneously performing combat air patrol over the carrier strike groups, providing close air support for maritime enforcement operations, conducting the strike packages against Iranian port infrastructure, and executing the precision tanker disabling runs that the blockade enforcement requires. Its versatility is the operational characteristic that makes it the correct aircraft for every aspect of the naval aviation mission in this theater simultaneously. The propulsion system is 2 General Electric F414 turbofan engines, each producing approximately 22,000 pounds of thrust in maximum afterburner. The performance envelope this enables reaches Mach 1.8, a maximum speed of approximately 1,200 nautical miles per hour, and a combat radius of roughly 500 nautical miles unrefueled. Add aerial refueling from the KC-135 tankers that have been maintaining their orbital patterns over UAE airspace since the first phase of the campaign, and the combat radius becomes effectively unlimited. The pilot can stay on station in the Gulf of Oman for as long as the mission requires. The weapon's employment capacity is 17,000 pounds of ordnance across 11 hardpoints. For the tanker disabling missions, the Super Hornet is configured with either the GBU-12 Pavway 2 laser-guided bomb, whose circular error probability of under 1 meter makes a smokestack, targeting from altitude geometrically achievable in a way that no unguided munition could replicate, or the M61A2 Vulcan 20mm cannon, whose 6,600 round per minute rate of fire produces the kind of rudder system damage that the Hansna engagement demonstrated. Both configurations produce the specific operational outcome that the blockade enforcement requires: disable the propulsion or steering system, Leave the hull intact. Leave the crew safe. Communicate the consequence of attempting the blockade run. The weapon selection for any specific engagement is the tactical decision of the pilot and the strike planning team. The footage of the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda engagements shows the impact, followed by the explosive signature that is consistent with either high explosive incendiary cannon rounds or the GBU-12. The specific identification requires access to operational records that CENTCOM has not fully declassified. What CENTCOM has released, the thermal footage showing the engagement sequence, makes the precision of the weapon employment visible regardless of the specific munition. Surgical. The word begins to inadequately describe what it takes to do this from altitude over rough water on a moving ship. These are the pilots that the American Naval Aviation Training Pipeline produces. The ones who can put precision munitions down a tanker smokestack on a moving vessel in operational conditions and fly away clean. The broader Iranian naval reality that underlies the blockade enforcement architecture is where the strategic analysis has to be placed to understand why the Super Hornet is not just executing these missions, but executing them without meaningful opposition. Iran's primary remaining Gulf naval tools are IRGC fast attack craft, small fast vessels armed with rockets and in some cases anti-ship missiles, and a submarine force that includes aging Kilo-class submarines and domestically built Ghadir and Fateh submarines that operate in the shallow littoral waters of the Gulf. The asymmetric doctrine that these assets support relies on swarming harassment and the threat of closing the strait through mining operations or shore-based missile strikes. Against the force posture currently arrayed against them, the fast attack boats encounter the Apache helicopters and the FA-18s that have been demonstrating their capability to address exactly this threat category in every engagement since Project Freedom began. The submarines are operating against a force that includes Virginia-class nuclear submarines, specifically designed to suppress exactly the threat profile that the Kilo and Ghadir boats represent in shallow water operations. The mining threat is addressed by the MQ-9 Reaper ISR platforms, the unmanned surface vehicles, and the EOD teams that have been operating in the strait throughout the conflict. The F-16CJ Wild Weasel's increased sortie rate over the theater is the operational tell that reveals the next phase's preparation regardless of what diplomatic track is currently being pursued. The F-16CJ is the suppression of enemy air defenses platform. The Wild Weasel variant, whose entire operational purpose is finding the surface-to-air missile radars that Iran has been reconstituting during the ceasefire period in the civilian-adjacent locations where the organized crime doctrine hides them, triggering those radars through its own presence as bait, receiving the radar emissions on its passive detection systems, and destroying the radar with high-speed anti-radiation missiles before the radar can produce a successful intercept of the strike aircraft that follow. The fact that F-16CJ sorties are increasing means the air defense suppression architecture for the next phase of the strike campaign is being actively prepared. You do not fly more Wild Weasel sorties because the diplomatic situation is improving. You fly more Wild Weasel sorties because the target set that the Wild Weasels are designed to suppress is being rebuilt and needs to be cataloged, and the strike package needs the CD corridor cleared before it goes in. The reconstituted Iranian air defense systems are being positioned around the specific target categories that the IRGC's survival planning prioritizes. The nuclear sites and bunkers, the Ayatollah-class protection positions, the IRGC senior command infrastructure. These are the locations where whatever surface-to-air capability survived the first phase or was restored during the ceasefire has been positioned to provide the maximum protection against the strike packages that would come in the second phase. The F-16CJ is finding them, cataloging them, preparing to destroy them. The retrenchment strategy is the analytical framework that makes the entire operational picture of May 9th coherent rather than contradictory. Retrenchment as a military political strategy does not seek to occupy territory or install a compliant successor government. It seeks to decapitate the specific institutional capacity that produces the threatening behavior, implement the economic pressure architecture that prevents reconstitution, and maintain the enforcement posture that gives the damaged institution no recovery space, while leaving it the option of diplomatic accommodation. Venezuela was the test case. The maximum naval blockade in the Caribbean, the economic pressure through sanctions and trade restrictions, the political pressure through coalition building and diplomatic isolation, and then, when the moment was correct, the direct action that removed Maduro, the subsequent management of the transition through Delcy Rodriguez with the implicit understanding that non-compliance by the successor would produce the same outcome. This is not an invasion. It is not a regime change that installs an American puppet. It is the removal of the specific actor whose continued presence in the institution produces the threatening behavior combined with the demonstration that the removal capability continues to exist if the threatening behavior resumes under different management. Iran is a harder problem than Venezuela. The scale is different. The nuclear dimension is different. The geographic complexity of the Strait of Hormuz is different. The existing proxy network infrastructure, even in its defunded and depleted current state, is different. The specific intelligence penetration required to execute at the precision that the Iran operation demands is different from what the Venezuela operation required, but the strategic logic is the same. Blockade, pressure, decapitate when the moment is correct, leave the accommodation option available throughout, apply maximum pressure to compress the timeline within which the accommodation calculation changes. The CIA assessment that Iran can withstand the blockade for 3 to 4 months before severe hardship hits. The general population is the specific timeline parameter that shapes the American patience calculation. If 3 to 4 months of blockade pressure produces the institutional crisis that forces a genuine concession, the diplomatic track running through Qatar and Pakistan and whatever the Qatari Prime Minister's White House meeting with Vance produced, is the mechanism for that concession to be formalized. The military track is the pressure that makes the diplomatic track's offers credible. You make a deal, or the blockade continues until the 3 to 4 month CIA timeline produces the internal collapse that makes the deal irrelevant. Rubio's statement from Italy on Friday is the most recent public articulation of where the diplomatic track stands. He told reporters that the United States expected Iran's formal response to the latest ceasefire proposal by end of day. The proposal reportedly calls for a 30-day mutual lifting of blockades, the American side lifting the port blockade, the Iranian side lifting its Strait of Hormuz restrictions, a bridge measure that creates the 30-day space for a more permanent ceasefire agreement to be negotiated with the nuclear provisions in the specific mandatory form that the American side has defined as the minimum acceptable outcome. Rubio's words were measured in the specific way that diplomatic communications are measured when the speaker understands that the other side is watching. The hope is it's something that can put us into a serious process of negotiation, not confidence, not expectation, hope. The same conditional framing that Trump used when he described the assumption of Iranian compliance as perhaps a big assumption. Both men are publicly acknowledging the same uncertainty about Iranian institutional decision-making, that the operational record of the conflict has been generating evidence for throughout its entire 69-day duration. The proposal on Iran's desk creates the specific binary that the blockade enforcement architecture is designed to make consequential. Accept the 30-day bridge mechanism and create the space for the permanent ceasefire negotiations that the nuclear provisions require. Or refuse it and continue absorbing the $500 million per day blockade impact, the tanker disabling operations, the retaliatory strikes against the port infrastructure that coordinates Iranian military actions, and the specific intelligence and covert operations that the Zanjan explosion and the MV Ocean Traders' Diego Garcia positioning suggest are running beneath the surface of the military engagement. Iran's choice is not between two acceptable options. It is between the less bad and the worse. The 30-day bridge mechanism requires enough immediate concession to make the diplomatic process credible to the American side without requiring the full nuclear dismantlement that the framework's permanent provisions ultimately demand. It creates the 30-day window during which the regime's leadership buys some relief from the blockade's economic impact, while the harder nuclear negotiations proceed. The worse option is the continued blockade that the CIA has assessed produces severe hardship to the general population within 3 to 4 months. With the specific addition that the Ocean Traders' positioning at Diego Garcia is providing the American side with the direct action option that makes Iranian compliance with the nuclear provisions achievable through means other than Iranian agreement. Al Jazeera's assessment that the war will end in American retreat reflects the specific analytical framework that looks at Iraq and Afghanistan as the reference points for American military operations, and concludes that the cost calculus eventually produces political pressure for withdrawal. The retrenchment strategy is specifically designed to operate outside the assumptions that make this analysis valid. You cannot run out the clock on an operation that is not trying to hold territory. You cannot generate the political pressure for withdrawal from an operation that is not producing American casualties at rates that affect domestic political support. You cannot exhaust the political will to maintain a blockade that costs $500 million per day to the adversary, and a fraction of that to the American side. The Venezuela operation did not produce American retreat. It produced Maduro's removal. The analytical framework that predicts American retreat is the same framework that predicted Venezuelan societal mobilization in Maduro's defense, that predicted Chinese and Russian material intervention sufficient to sustain the regime, that predicted the American domestic political coalition for the operation would fracture. None of those predictions were accurate. The same framework being applied to Iran is producing the same predictions with the same relationship to the operational reality. The China meeting that Trump is heading toward produces the specific diplomatic variable that neither the military track nor the framework negotiations have yet fully resolved. If Beijing uses the Hengli refinery secondary sanctions pressure and the specific commercial calculation that Iranian oil purchases are no longer worth their cost to tell Tehran that Chinese diplomatic protection is not unconditional, the Iranian decision calculus about the 30-day bridge mechanism changes. If Beijing uses the meeting to demonstrate that American secondary sanctions will not alter Chinese support for the Iranian regime, the Iranian decision calculus remains where it has been throughout the conflict. The 8 unmarked white aircraft that were spotted over Zanjan on May 8th are the visible indicator of which direction Beijing's calculation is currently running. Aircraft moving supplies or advisors into Iran are moving them into a country that Beijing has made a strategic decision to continue supporting, regardless of American secondary sanctions pressure. Aircraft moving personnel or supplies out of Iran or into Iran for purposes other than military support represent a different calculation. The mystery of the aircraft's cargo remains unresolved in the public record. The strategic significance of their presence, whatever their cargo, is that someone made a decision on May 8th, in the middle of the most active phase of the conflict's enforcement operations, to move 8 unmarked commercial variant aircraft into Iranian airspace. That decision reflects a calculation. The calculation reflects an institutional position. The institutional position will be visible in what the aircraft delivered and in how the Iranian response to the 30-day bridge mechanism is framed when it arrives. Rubio expected the response by end of day on May 9th. The response will tell you what the aircraft were carrying more accurately than any satellite imaging can. Russia's 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine for Victory Day is the other major diplomatic development of May 9th, 2026. Trump announced it on Truth Social. A celebration in Russia and in Ukraine, where Trump notes Ukraine was also a significant part of World War II's outcome. A suspension of all kinetic activity, a prisoner swap of 1,000 from each side. The specific diplomatic significance of the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire for the Iran operation is the bandwidth it frees in American strategic communication. Russia's engagement in the Ukraine ceasefire, even a temporary one, reduces the specific talking point that Russian diplomatic pressure against American Iran operations was supposed to generate. A Russia that is participating in an American-facilitated ceasefire in Ukraine is a Russia whose institutional position against American military operations in the Middle East is less credibly expressed in the same diplomatic period. The prisoner swap is the specific humanitarian outcome that the temporary ceasefire's domestic framing depends on. Both sides receiving 1,000 of their people back from captivity provides the specific positive human dimension that makes the ceasefire politically sustainable for the audiences of both governments who are being told the ceasefire serves their interests. Whether the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire leads to the end of that conflict is the question that Rubio's measured hope characterization would apply to equally well. Things that seem potentially possible without being certain are described with hope in the diplomatic vocabulary. The permanent ceasefire in Ukraine is in the same category as the framework agreement with Iran. Potentially achievable, not certain. Dependent on institutional decisions that the institutions have not yet made. The specific operational picture of May 9th, 2026 is therefore the picture of an American military and diplomatic apparatus that is simultaneously enforcing a blockade with Super Hornets and smokestack precision, preparing the sea de-architecture for the next phase with F-16CJ Wild Weasel sorties, positioning the ocean trader at Diego Garcia for the direct action option, receiving the Qatari Prime Minister's back-channel communications at the White House, expecting the Iranian formal response to the 30-day bridge mechanism, heading toward a Xi Jinping meeting that will shape the China variable, and managing the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire as a separate diplomatic track that intersects with the Iran operation through the Russia variable. No single one of these is the whole picture. All of them together are the picture of an administration that has decided to run multiple simultaneous pressure tracks and allow their convergence on the common point of Iranian institutional decision-making to produce the outcome. Not a single decisive moment. The accumulated weight of $500 million per day, and disabled tankers and smokestacks and port strikes and ocean trader positioning, and wild weasel sorties and Qatari back channels and sea meetings, and the specific intelligence that the Zanjan explosion and the Immortal Guard's operations inside Iran are generating. The regime that Pezeshkian called madness is making the decision about whether to accept the 30-day bridge mechanism in the specific context of all of this simultaneously. The FA-18 that disabled 2 tankers with 1 sortie yesterday morning is the most visible single data point in the accumulated weight of that simultaneous pressure. 2 ships, 1 jet, 0 drama. The smoke rising from the sea, Star 3's stack in the CENTCOM thermal footage, is the specific visual document of what maximum pressure looks like when it is operating at full effectiveness. $13 billion in blocked oil, $500 million per day, 70 tankers turned back, 4 disabled, 1 sortie each time. The pilot flies away clean, and in Tehran, in the bunkers where the decision makers are changing their routines daily because the intelligence network has demonstrated it can place coordinates with lethal precision anywhere in Iranian territory, the formal response to the 30-day bridge mechanism is being formulated by men who understand that the alternative to the 30 days is not the status quo. The status quo is the Super Hornet. The alternative to the Super Hornet is the Ocean Trader. And the alternative to the Ocean Trader is what Trump described, without qualification, as something this conflict will not require if Iran agrees to give what has been agreed to. The pilot flew away clean. The proposal is on Iran's desk. The clock on Rubio's end-of-day expectation is running.